All right, so you should have just completed your bell ringer with moi, and now you have your direct instruction video up, obviously, if you're watching it, and your guided notes pulled up as well. So let's go through this like we normally would. When I type, you type. So what are we talking about today? Today we are talking about something called biotechnology. Now, what does that mean? That sounds super sciencey. Biotechnology is just technology or tech that we use to change living things, okay? So an easy way to break down this word is, well, we know what technology is, we're using it right now, but anytime you see that prefix bio just means life. So whenever you see bio, think of living things. So this is technology for living things. Pretty easy. So we're going to talk about different types of biotechnology today because what it's going to do is typically involve different traits or genetics, so changing the genes of a living thing. Before we get into it, I want to let you guys know that there are many jobs available whenever you are at that point in life when you're old enough to hit the road and get a job. A lot of jobs use biotechnology and they usually pay pretty big bucks, all right? So you can either be like a medical scientist, so you study science to help things that are, related to medicine, or a microbiologist, which is something that, or somebody that studies things that are micro or super tiny and you need like a microscope like this, or an epidemiologist, which is somebody who studies like diseases. I actually have a friend right now who is using biotechnology and she works for a company that's working on pushing out better testing for COVID. So that's obviously like very relevant to today. And again, you can make some big bucks. Like over here in this chart, if you work in a job as a medical science liaison, that just means you're somebody who like encourages different companies to use biotechnology. You could start out in the first year making $144,000. That is a lot of money. I wish I got paid that much money. So let's dive into it. What are different types of biotechnology and how are they used? So one thing that biotechnology can be used for is something called artificial selection. Now, what does that mean? Well, selection sounds like select, so we know we're just picking certain things, and artificial just means fake. Artificial selection can also be called selective breeding. So you're going to hear me say one of the two. I might interchange those terms. It means the same thing, okay? So what we're actually doing with artificial selection is you are selecting what specific organisms are going to breed together. Because naturally, like if you think of a tiger, like all those tigers are just out and about. Hopefully not around here, that would be scary, but they're just naturally going to pick which tigers they're going to mate with and which ones they're going to create new tigers with, right? But with artificial selection, we as humans are actually taking charge and we're saying, no, this animal is going to reproduce with this animal only. Why do we do that? So this is normally done because we want to create new organisms that have certain desirable traits. Desirable traits, okay? So the best example of selective breeding that I can think of is think of all of those different dog breeds that exist in the world, okay? All dogs came from wolves. They don't all naturally just look like this in the wild when dogs way back in the day first appeared, right? Humans decided, okay, I want a dog that is super fast. So they bred only the super fast dogs together so that trait could be passed down. Same thing with like physical characteristics. Maybe you want a really teeny tiny dog. So since the traits come from the parents, they're going to make sure that the parents of the new dog are also super teeny tiny. So that's what selective breeding is. You're really selecting what traits you want to be passed down, so you're making sure that those organisms are reproducing together. That's kind of how we got a liger, if you know about a liger. Lions and tigers don't just naturally breed together. Humans actually made it happen. They wanted to see a liger be made. This is also how we got a lot of plants actually that we have today. We used to only have like this plant called a common wild mustard, but because of the way farmers and different people decided, I want these plants to reproduce because they have really good characteristics, desirable traits, the plants eventually over time shifted and shifted and shifted into what we have today, such as broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, etc. So that is another good example of selective breeding. Oh, totally forgot about this blank. So desirable traits, when we say desirable, that just means that they are positive. They're good things and you want to see them being passed down. Very important part about selective breeding, the actual DNA of the individual organisms are not being changed. So if I have two dogs, right, and I select those two dogs to breed, I'm not actually going into their DNA and changing anything. That's not happening. They're just being made to reproduce together. Now, the other type of biotechnology that we're going to talk about does go in and change individual DNA. So what is that one all about? So again, another use of biotechnology is for something called genetic engineering. So there's that word again, genetic. When you see that gene, you know it's talking about genes, and engineering means that you are kind of crafting it. So they're going in and actually changing the genes into making it into something that they want to see in that organism. So genetic engineering is the process in which a piece of DNA in an organism is changed. Okay, so that might sound a little confusing, so let me break that down even more for us. So there are two ways that scientists can change the DNA of a real living organism. First, they can actually take out the DNA. They're not going to actually go at it with a saw like this GIF. That would be terrifying, but they will remove a section of DNA and they can change it so it represents a different gene or a different trait than what that organism already had, and then return it back to that same organism. So then they now will reflect that new trait. Okay, so a great example of this is if you're ever walking through Walmart or PetSmart and you walk past that big tank full of fish and they have a bunch of those super cheap, teeny tiny colorful fish and they can practically glow in the dark. Those fish were actually made from genetic engineering. So they didn't naturally have that shiny, sparkly, glowy color. Scientists actually took a fish, they extracted or took out some of their DNA, changed it so that they would have this color and put it back in the fish. If it sounds crazy, that's because it is crazy. So now that the fish had that changed DNA, whenever it reproduced with another fish, that DNA can be passed down. So all of those fish will make fish that also glow. Kind of nuts. Same thing over here. If you're like, are those glow in the cat? Are those glow in the dark cats? They are. So scientists have also figured out a way to make certain animals actually glow like a cat. I hope that doesn't happen to people because that would be terrifying. So another way that genetic engineering can happen is that they can actually transfer the DNA from one species to another. So what I mean by that is, let's say, and this is a bizarre example, this isn't what's going to happen, but let's say I wanted to have more traits that are like a tiger. So scientists would then take certain traits from the genes in a tiger and place it into my DNA so then I would have those traits. Again, that's hopefully not going to happen. That's kind of crazy, but that's exactly what it means when we say transferring the DNA from one species to another. So a good example of that would be over here if you have corn. This is a more realistic example. If you have a virus-resistant plant, meaning that that plant, for some reason, whatever's going on with their genes, it's not going to get sick in the way that a corn plant could possibly get sick, they can take the DNA from that good, healthy plant and transfer it to a different corn plant, so then it's also going to be resistant to that virus. So genetic engineering is pretty cool, pretty crazy, but that's another good use of biotechnology. Last use, and I think this is the one we know the best, and it's, I think, the coolest. Another use for biotechnology is cloning. Okay, So you've probably heard of a clone before. It's just an organism or a cell or any piece of genetic material. It doesn't have to be the entire organism. It can just be one piece of DNA that's being cloned. That is genetically identical to the one that it came from. So if you took a clone of me, there would be a completely genetically identical Miss Long standing right next to me. Kind of crazy. Just like these cows over here. See how they're splitting off? They are identical. One thing I want to say that's super important, going back to, I'm going to say it, mitosis. I know, oof, that new daughter cell, we kind of said this a little bit, it's a clone of that original cell. So we know that it's genetically identical. That new daughter cell from mitosis or cellular division is a clone. It's an exact copy. So not that long ago, in 1996, well, to you that might seem like a long time ago, but to me it's not that long ago, the first successful clone of a full, complete sheep was made, and her name was Dolly. Isn't that cute? So it actually kind of started to freak people out a little bit because, like, are we getting too advanced with our science? Like, should we be worried that scientists are now able to make clones of big, full living things that are also mammals like we are? Should that worry us? So that's taking me to our last slide, talking about biotechnology. You can kind of get into some iffy gray areas when you talk about this because it might make some people a little bit nervous, and rightfully so. So there are many arguments or debates over whether or not it's okay for us to even use biotechnology in the first place, especially when we're talking about specific areas. Like, you might be okay with using biotechnology when we're changing up corn plants, but when you start to talk about maybe making clones of people, you might be not okay with that, which is fine. So people often question whether or not it is ethical to do so. So when it comes to this standard specifically, you're going to hear the word ethical or ethics a lot. What does that mean? So when we're talking about ethics or whether or not something is ethical, that just means, is it morally right or wrong? Like, is this something that I know in my heart we should be doing? A good example, like, let's say somebody just kind of ticks you off one day and you just know you just want to swing at them, like you just want to hit them. But you know, ethically, morally, you shouldn't be punching people. Right? So that's a good example to think of. Like, is this something that I know we shouldn't be doing? So people often think about that when it comes to biotechnology. They think, are we taking things a little bit too far? Some people think, are we playing the role of God since, something living is made? Who are we to go in and change it if that's how it was born? Some people kind of question that. And also, like, are there long-term effects of things that we haven't discovered yet? Like, if we're changing the genes of certain corn, like, what if that's having an effect on my body when I eat it and we just don't know about it yet? There's also this picture over here. People are really worried that we're going to start making designer babies. Like, what if we can go in and decide, I want my baby to be super smart and have a super high IQ, but also perfect pitch. They're musically talented, and I don't want them to be bald when they're older. Like, is that too much? Like, should we have that right if that technology comes to be? So that's what all of this ethical, is this good, is this bad nonsense is about. Okay, so that is all I have for you today. If you have any questions about any of this, hit me up, meet me on Google Meet, request a Wi-Fi room. There's so many options, you guys. If not, you're good to go. See you tomorrow.